We're here to talk about current affairs for young audiences. Now, obviously, a lot of young audiences think current affairs is a bit doom and gloom, but can humor be the answer? Well, this is what Al Hudood think, and we're going to be speaking about that today. I'm Charlie. I'm from #OurStories, a international media publication that's been running this module. I'm really excited to be sitting here with a bunch of amazing people who have a lot of information about current affairs for young audiences.
I'm Robin. I'm also with #OurStories, and my background is current affairs, more with TV news, and I've been doing that for more or less 20 years.
Hello, I'm Islam Arikhat. I am the editor and co-founder of Hudood, a political satire publication that's focused around the Middle East and North Africa primarily, but like also the wider region for that audience.
Yeah, hi, I'm Henrik Grunnet. I am a media advisor at IMS, International Media Support. And we're really excited about this and what we're doing now. We have to admit that among our more than 100 media partners around the world, reaching young audiences is not our strength at the moment. And since the countries we work in, more than 60% are young people of the potential audiences. So now we hope by showing examples from the best of our partners, we will get some inspiration that the other partners can also use.
So I'd love to kind of first delve into Al Hudood. Can you give us a little background on the publication and what got you started?
So yeah, of course. We started in 2013. It was a couple of years after like the beginning of the Arab Spring. At that point, it was a tiny one in Jordan when we started, and it crumbled quite quickly as the movement. So we were kind of just like didn't know what to do. We wanted to do things about the situation around us. We had no idea what. We were activists and writers. Wherever we wrote, everything gets slashed, everything gets censored in ways or others. And we thought it would be just a great way to express what we have and what we want to say about the situation, and also luckily like a creative outlet. I mean, we have older audiences. I think we have it's an okay amount of older audiences, but obviously like the main majority is by far the 20 to 35 is by far concentrated there. But the nature of satire, I think, is like partly the nature of satire, but partly also satire, the way we do it, the deadpan satire wasn't popular, wasn't really a thing when we were younger. So, or for the older generation. So it kind of was really, we're just completely zeroed in on the younger audiences.
If we take the US, they have the comedy channel with Trevor, and that has become really popular for young people, especially. So popular that this is actually for many the only source of news and current affairs information they get. Is that something that you have been thinking about? What if people only get it from our point of view, only get the satire and not what's behind the satire? How do you use that when you do your work? How do you look into well, people also need to get this information in order to act?
In most of the cases, we'd have to put within the headline the context of some sort, not actually put the context, but understand this, this is based on this. So you'd be always linking to something. So because otherwise, again, it's you go back to the problem of I think doing bad satire, it would just end up a lot sounding like fake news.
Do you think there's ways that other news publications that maybe concentrate more on reporting it straight could play with satire in their work to kind of boost their reach with younger audiences?
I think absolutely. But I think the thing that we found difficult is you need a very specific skill set. You can't just get someone who's funny to make your work funnier, and you can't just get a journalist and tell them, it's like, can you now be funny? It, for the majority of it, like for the people who work with us, for the people who contribute with us, they are people who are very sharp, really smart, educated, aware of current affairs. Most of them even have the souls of activists, if not activists themselves, and are funny. So I think for newsrooms, if they have someone with that, or they could attract someone like that, I think that would be amazing. Whether it was to do like a part of it, like a small thing that, at the end of the week to be done by that person, or a newsletter that's written by that person. I think there's definitely room for that. It's just, as it is very difficult for us to find those people to work with, it's a very difficult skill set to find.
I think over the most recent years, we've seen some newsrooms, for example, like the Washington Post, kind of play around with TikTok comedy almost, trying to bring news in a more humorous way for younger audiences on the shorter video platforms. And I think that for a lot of news organizations may be the way in. Have you got any examples of your work, Islam, you'd like to highlight in terms of the way that you kind of make stories satirical? Could you talk a little bit about a particular example that you kind of want to highlight?
So like, for example, like one of the stories that went quite big and we felt that really hit a nerve was about the problem of the schism and the hypocrisy of Europe. And it's something that I think we've discussed so many times over. Every time there was like a refugee story, I don't know what, and we're just like, we try to get into it. And it's always been incredibly difficult. So I think a couple of months ago, when they were closing the borders with Belarus, and we just started that day with it's like we're here. So every morning we'd have an editorial meeting that lasts an hour. Before that, a media monitoring expert, who's also a very good writer, sort of scans through the news from basically the majority of outlets, looking at all news from multiple angles, and then comes in and says, it's like, okay, these are the top things, these are the different perspectives of how they're being talked about, and then it's like sort of opens the ground for discussion. We start longer discussions of, it's like, what do we want to say about this? It's like then combining like the different perspectives, and at some point we reach a place where like, okay, like this, in an ideal situation, after a lot of fights and a lot of hair tearing, we're like, okay, this is what we want to say about this issue. And then we start, okay, it's like, so how can we make it funny? So one of the people in the editorial meeting in the morning was like, they came up with the idea, which was, it was Poland stops shipment of refugees coming from Belarus for not meeting the European standards. And we're like, okay, yeah, it's like, we like that, it's funny, but at the same time, it's just like, it could go further. And then again, it's like, it just goes back to just building on each other's work. And and someone pushed it a little bit further, just like came up with a headline, which was EU rebuilds dismantled internal walls around the continent. And it's just like, in one sentence, it just felt like it encompassed everything. It showed like all of the paradox of the problem and the schism that's in everything that is being said within Europe.
That particular story is in the database, so if anyone wants to have a look at the story itself, you can just search within the database to find more details about that particular story.
What is truth? What is satire? Have you not had these doubts in when you bring it forward? Do people know that this is a satire, or do they take it in because so many awkward things are actually happening for real?
It's a very, very difficult one, and I think, it was incredibly difficult. Like the worst time that we've had was Trump time, because as most people were saying, it's like there's like so much material, but there isn't. Like, this is beyond satire. A lot of like, there's nothing that you can do that is worse or like that is more extreme. I think it's like, also when we first started, when there wasn't another political satire magazine about the region in Arabic, and that's, as I said, like the format wasn't a popular one for the majority. Like some stories which were really beyond the top were believed, but because like there's nothing else, like the people didn't understand that this could be anything else because they haven't been like I remember once when we wrote a story about Father Christmas being arrested because he didn't pay customs on his toys getting them through the country, and then basically I think 40 major news outlets, including one in print, took the story and distributed it, and then it goes one step further when the police issued an official statement saying that we actually have not arrested him. So, so with something like that, and while it was believed, it is funny. It caused no harm in itself. For us, it showed how unprofessional and awful actual news outlets out there are. So when a story like that gets taken, it goes, and especially when it goes viral through news outlets, it just proves how bad the media is and how much they need to look at themselves. But again, it's it goes back to one thing: having a team who, when someone pitches something, there are 5 people who are trying to look at every angle that this will be seen through. And when we're having good days, which is most days actually, to be honest, we just take each other's headlines and just try to fix them to make whatever we're worried about not be there.
Robin, I know obviously we're talking about current affairs stories and how to tell them to young audiences. I know within the database that a lot of people watching this will have access to. We have some really great examples in there as well. Could you just go through a few of your favorites and why they're interesting in terms of addressing young audiences on this topic?
BBC's got an entire news bulletin aimed at youth. I think it's between the ages of 11 and 18, if I'm not mistaken. And that they cover all sorts of topics, whether it's COVID, whether it's refugee issues, whether it's sport, and also it's youth presenter led. And they make it easily digestible. News 24 it was sort of a campaign, but it was current affairs because it tackled the death, the murder and rape of a woman in Cape Town that was killed in a post office, and there was the whole Me Too campaign, and they created a site within their site called Am I Next? But what they did, part of that campaign was getting people to write letters, to write on their own experience. It was multimedia, it was video, and it really touched a nerve with the youth and with women of the country. And then taking it to really much younger crowd. This was also a campaign, but something in South Africa, an organization in South Africa called Mzansi, Food for Mzansi, they ran a campaign called Captain Stay Safe during COVID. And what happened was they realized that the youth in rural areas and their parents the information was not getting to them. So important information: what is COVID? Why do you wear a mask? Stats, figures, how to keep healthy, all of those kind of things. And what they did was they introduced a cartoon character and these podcasts and basically a cartoon, like a print version of cartoon, to get the message out to youth.
I think it's really, really interesting when you look at organizations that are targeting such young audiences, like the BBC one that you mentioned and Food from Mwanzi. The fact that they have to adapt the current affairs stories that they're telling to such a young audience, and how they kind of tread that line in terms of what's okay to kind of talk about as well with such young audiences. I noticed in the Boko Haram coverage from the BBC, they used graphics to kind of tell the story of, and from a first-person narrative, to tell the story of people, who were facing terrorism threats and were being killed. That's a really hard topic to talk to 12-year-olds about, and having to tread that line is really impressive. And it's something that I think a lot of people who are watching this module could kind of watch that piece and kind of learn a few tips in terms of how to tread that line. From that, kind of what lessons have you learnt in terms of reaching out to younger audiences? What have you learnt over the period of time that the publication has been active? And I'm sure myself and Robert can also share some lessons #Our Stories has learned afterwards as well.
However much you produce, it will be consumed. I think one other thing, like looking at it as a market, while especially in the region, there isn't a lot of money. Like the younger audiences don't have much money, but they are willing to part with that money for causes that they believe in. So it's like we have a membership program which is going well, which for against most people's thoughts, like most people thought that this would not work, but it is, and it's just about talking to them. They feel more passionately and like more strongly about things. They want to be heard. They want something to speak for them because there isn't enough. So they need a lot, and they want a lot, and they're willing to give a lot.
Our whole organization is built on the idea of like empowering the individual to kind of share their story because of that reason, because that's kind of the success metric that we've seen is young people listen to young people and want to have that representation on screen, and that's kind of why our publication is set up the way it is. I also say relatability is a lesson that we learned quite early on. When a story hasn't been shaped to be relatable to the audience that you're publishing it to, we see a huge drop in views and engagement. And I think that's a really key lesson that a lot of newsrooms still need to quite learn.
Make it interesting, sexy, appealing, not boring, not just, and keep it moving. Even if it's a difficult story to tell it through a younger voice, and something that a younger crowd or the youth would find appealing. So even if it's, it might be climate change, you have to find a way to tell it. And I think Charlie, you might have more to say on this topic, but you have to tell it's a difficult topic to make sexy, but you have to tell it in a way that young people are going to find appealing.
Definitely. When we did our first person series, which is a climate show for young audiences, it was difficult because, we were trying to approach stories like water shortages and droughts across the world and make that sexy. Make drought sexy is really, really hard. So we looked for innovations, that were unusual and unexpected, and went down that route. For example, when we covered waste management, we did a story on a young girl who was making plants into hair pieces, something that's really unusual. We had a story on the construction industry, again, not very sexy, but we told a story about a guy who was turning urine into bricks. Really unexpected, and those kind of stories really resonated with people because they were so unexpected, and it got them into the conversation. By the end of the conversation, they learned the necessary climate information that they needed to. It was a draw in, and we also provided them with augmented reality lenses that also allowed them to kind of play around with some of the ideas that they'd learnt and share it with their peers.
I'm really looking forward and hoping that others can use this for something, because most of it is just sad stories on top of sad stories, and we know this is not what an audience like, and especially not what a young audience likes. They like a fresh view, and maybe that will inspire them to do something differently.
Thank you so much, Issam, for joining us. We're going to continue this discussion with Rosanna FM, but thank you so much for your time today. It's been really amazing finding out how you use humour to reach young audiences.
It's a pleasure.
Rob and Henrik, thanks so much for joining as well, and we'll continue this discussion with Rosanna.